On a Tuesday morning last March, a white Toyota Camry rolled into my bay with 74,000 miles on the clock, and an owner who looked genuinely confused. He told me he had been doing everything right. Oil changes on schedule, good fuel. The dealership had just serviced it 2 months earlier. But something felt off. The idle had this faint roughness to it, not dramatic enough to complain about easily, but there every single morning. And the gas mileage had quietly fallen off a cliff over the last year. He had gone from 32 miles per gallon on his commute to somewhere around 23. No warning lights, no codes, nothing obvious. He handed me his receipt from the dealership visit. Throttle body cleaning, new spark plugs, air filter, $640. The car still felt rough the next morning. I asked him one question. "Do you let it warm up in the driveway before you drive?" He smiled. He said he had done it his whole life, especially in winter. He said his father taught him it was the right thing to do for the engine. He would give it a good 5 to 10 minutes before he ever left the driveway every single day. I nodded, and I told him his father's advice, which was absolutely correct for cars built before 1990, has been quietly destroying his Toyota engine every single morning for years. That moment right there is why this video matters. Because the single most common Toyota habit that drivers believe is protecting their engine is actually one of the most damaging things you can do to a modern, fuel-injected engine. And it does its damage slowly, invisibly, without a single warning light, without a single code, without a single symptom you can easily point to until the damage has been accumulating for years. I have been working on Toyotas for 2 decades. Camrys, Corollas, RAV4s, Tacomas, Tundras, Highlanders, all of them. And I can tell you without hesitation that prolonged cold idling is the most misunderstood habit in Toyota ownership. Drivers do it because they care, because they want to protect the engine, and the engines suffer for it anyway. Caring is not enough if the habit itself is built on outdated information. Here is the uncomfortable truth most Toyota owners have never heard. Modern fuel-injected engines do not need extended warm-up periods. Full stop. That advice was born in the era of carburetors, engines that genuinely required warm idle time to stabilize their fuel delivery before you drove them. Carburetors metered fuel mechanically. They were sensitive to temperature, they flooded, they stumbled. Warming them up made real sense. But Toyota phased out carbureted engines across their entire lineup through the 1980s. By the early 1990s, fuel injection was standard, and fuel injection changes everything about how a cold engine should be treated. Modern Toyota engines use electronic fuel injection, which means the engine control unit reads coolant temperature sensors, intake air temperature sensors, and oxygen sensors from the instant it starts. It adjusts fuel delivery in real time, and it compensates for cold conditions automatically. It does not need 5 minutes of driveway idling to figure out what to do. It already knows. The habit your father swore by was designed for a technology that no longer exists in your car. But here is where it gets worse. Prolonged idling does not just fail to help a modern Toyota engine, it actively causes damage. The damage happens through a process most drivers have never heard of, working through 2 separate mechanisms that compound each other over time. The first mechanism is fuel dilution of the engine oil. When you start a cold Toyota engine and let it sit at idle, the engine runs on an enriched mixture. Cold air and cold metal make fuel atomization less efficient, so the engine control unit injects more fuel than the engine can fully combust. That extra fuel has to go somewhere. Some of it burns off. But a meaningful portion washes past the piston rings and drips down into the oil pan, directly into your engine oil. This is not a design flaw. It is an unavoidable physics reality of cold starts. Every internal combustion engine does it. The key is how quickly the engine gets hot enough to evaporate that fuel contamination back out through the positive crankcase ventilation system. A properly driven cold start, where the car is gently moving within 30 to 60 seconds of starting, warms the engine far faster than stationary idling. And a warm engine burns off that fuel contamination before it has time to cause harm. But an engine sitting in the driveway idling for 5 to 10 minutes stays cold far longer. The fuel dilution accumulates in the oil. The oil temperature never climbs fast enough to evaporate it out. And what you end up with is engine oil that has been thinned by gasoline. Oil that no longer provides the film strength it was designed to provide. Oil that cannot protect bearing surfaces, camshaft lobes, and cylinder walls at the specification your Toyota was engineered to depend on. And here is the thing about modern Toyota engines that makes this even more critical. Many newer Toyota models, including RAV4 models with the 2.5-liter A25A engine and multiple Camry and Highlander platforms, use gasoline direct injection or a combination of port and direct injection. Gasoline direct injection engines spray fuel directly into the combustion chamber at extremely high pressure. This arrangement improves efficiency and power, but it also means more unburned fuel has direct exposure to cylinder walls and piston rings during cold starts. Gasoline direct injection engines are inherently more susceptible to fuel dilution than older port-injected designs. If your Toyota has a newer engine and you have been idling it cold every morning, the oil contamination risk is higher than it has ever been on any Toyota you have previously owned. The practical result is this: your oil loses viscosity faster than the service interval assumes. The lubricating film protecting your engine's most critical metal surfaces becomes thinner and weaker without you ever knowing it happened. There is no warning light for gradual oil dilution, no code, no symptom you can feel on a Tuesday morning in the driveway. The engine sounds exactly the same. But internally, wear is accelerating. The second mechanism is carbon buildup. And this one is arguably worse because it is cumulative and almost impossible to reverse without professional intervention once it reaches a certain threshold. When a Toyota engine idles for extended periods at cold temperatures, combustion is inherently incomplete. The fuel mixture is richer than normal, combustion temperatures are lower than normal, and the exhaust system has not reached operating temperature. In that environment, unburned fuel residue and oil vapor deposits do not get burned off the way they would in a fully warm engine being driven at normal load. Instead, they land on surfaces. They cool, they harden, they turn into carbon deposits. Over thousands of cold morning idles, these deposits accumulate on intake valves, combustion chamber walls, and piston crowns, and in direct injection engines, they build up on the intake valves themselves where no fuel wash ever reaches. Carbon on intake valves is particularly damaging. These deposits restrict airflow into the cylinder, they throw off the air-fuel ratio the ECU is trying to maintain, they prevent the valve from sealing properly, and they create hot spots inside the combustion chamber that can trigger pre-ignition. Pre-ignition is when the fuel-air mixture ignites before the spark plug fires. It sounds like a faint knock or ping, but it creates pressure spikes inside the cylinder that the connecting rod, piston, and bearings were never designed to absorb. Over time, pre-ignition driven by carbon buildup destroys engines from the inside, while drivers assume the problem is something else entirely. The Toyota owner in my bay that morning had both problems. His fuel trims told the story on the scanner. Long-term fuel trim had climbed steadily positive, meaning the engine control unit, ECU, had been adding fuel to compensate for what it perceived as lean conditions, a classic signature of airflow restriction at the intake valves. His idle air control system was hunting, trying to stabilize an idle that kept drifting because the intake was not flowing the air it was supposed to flow. And his oil, which he had changed less than 3,000 miles earlier, already showed slight dilution when we tested it. None of this had triggered a check engine light. The engine was not broken. It was compensating. Beautifully, quietly, expertly compensating. The way modern Toyotas do. Until the compensation is no longer enough. He asked me how much damage had been done. I told him the honest answer: we cannot know without a bore scope inspection of the intake valves. When we ran it, the valves showed medium-grade carbon deposits. Not catastrophic, but not clean either. Walnut blasting to remove those deposits runs between $400 and $700 at most independent shops. Not a cheap procedure, not a quick one. All of it caused by a habit he thought was protecting his engine. Now, here is the critical piece that most people miss when they first hear this information. The answer is not to just start the car and immediately floor it. That is its own form of damage. Cold metal has not expanded to its proper tolerances. Cold oil has not fully circulated to every bearing surface, every camshaft lobe, every cylinder wall. The first seconds after a cold start are genuinely the highest wear moment in your engine's entire operating cycle. Engineers at Toyota and at every other manufacturer have measured the wear equivalent of a cold start under load as comparable to a significant distance of normal driving. The metal-on-metal contact that occurs in those first seconds before oil pressure has stabilized at every surface is real and measurable. So, what does a modern Toyota actually need at cold start? 30 to 60 seconds of idle. That is it. Enough time for oil pressure to build and circulate to critical surfaces. Enough time for the ECU to read its sensors and establish baseline fueling. Enough time for you to buckle your seatbelt, check your mirrors, and put the car in gear. Then you drive gently. Light throttle, normal acceleration. No hard pulls, no highway merging at full throttle, no aggressive passing until the coolant temperature gauge has moved off its cold position. That gentle driving is what heats the engine efficiently. Moving engine components under light load generates heat faster and more evenly than stationary idling. It allows the oil to warm and flow. It gives the enriched cold start fuel mixture the combustion conditions it needs to actually burn completely instead of washing past the rings. This is not a theory. Toyota owner manuals across multiple model years explicitly state it. Warm the engine by driving gently after a brief idle period. The recommendation for extended driveway warm-up appears nowhere in official guidance. It exists only in the cultural memory of an older generation of drivers maintaining a habit that made sense once and causes harm now. For the Camry owner in my bay, the fix going forward was straightforward. Stop the long idle, drive gently from cold, and address the existing carbon deposits before they progress. We ran an intake cleaning treatment, discussed a follow-up walnut blast at his next service interval, and I recommended he add a quality PEA-based fuel system cleaner to every third or fourth tank to help slow reaccumulation. He left with a car that felt noticeably smoother within a week as the cleaning treatment worked through the system. His long-term fuel trim dropped closer to zero over the following month. He also told me quietly that he felt a little angry, not at me, at the idea that he had been doing something wrong for years while genuinely trying to do right by his car. That feeling is legitimate. This information is not taught. It is not part of the car buying conversation. Dealerships do not explain it during service visits, and so drivers inherit advice from parents and grandparents and friends. advice that was once correct and is now quietly causing harm. The good news is that once you stop the habit, the damage slows immediately. The fuel dilution problem disappears almost instantly. The carbon accumulation rate drops dramatically. The engine can begin operating at the conditions it was engineered for, instead of compensating around a daily insult to its intake and oil system. And if the deposits have not yet reached the point of causing misfire codes or significant power loss, regular use of a quality detergent additive can slow their progression meaningfully. But if you have been doing this for years, and your Toyota has more than 60,000 miles on it, a borescope inspection of the intake valves is worth having done, not because the sky is falling, but because knowing what is actually in your engine gives you real information instead of assumptions. And real information is what separates Toyota owners whose cars reach 250,000 miles running strong from Toyota owners whose cars start developing mysterious, rough, idle, and sluggish acceleration at 90,000 miles and spend the next decade chasing symptoms that were never random. Your Toyota was engineered to last. The long-term reliability data on properly maintained Toyotas is genuinely exceptional. But that reliability assumes the engine is being operated the way its engineering intended. And the engineers who designed it never assumed you would let it sit cold rich in a driveway every morning for a decade. 30 seconds. Then drive gently. That is the entire habit change. If this changed the way you think about your morning routine with your Toyota, hit the like button so more owners see this before the damage compounds further. Subscribe if you want weekly breakdowns that give you real mechanic-level knowledge instead of the myths most drivers have been running on for years. And if you have already had to deal with a carbon cleaning or a rough idle on a Toyota you thought you were taking care of, drop it in the comments. The most expensive damage never announces itself. It always builds quietly, every morning in a driveway, while the owner walks back inside to finish their coffee.